Lawmakers don't use the term the way you would. Part 3 of our series, The Cost of Spending, focuses on inadequate solutions. The Bowles-Simpson Deficit Debt Commission report came out 2 years and 18 days ago. And on that brisk December morning, Democratic Senator Kent Conrad painted a dire picture if lawmakers did not move quickly.
I really believe we are at a critical juncture. We are borrowing 40 cents of every dollar that we spend in this country. Our revenue as a share of our national income is the lowest it's been in 60 years. Our spending is the highest it's been in 60 years as a share of our national income. That is not sustainable. If we fail to act now, our country could find itself in a circumstance in which we have to take draconian action at the worst possible time in the midst of a crisis. I pray to God that we have the wisdom to act before that point.
Again, more than 2 years ago, the two commission chairs could not agree more.
This baby ain't going away.
Our plan reduces the deficit by $4 trillion over the next 9 years, approximately.
A $4 trillion reduction in less than 10 years. Lawmakers called it a real start if it could pass Congress. It never has. Fast forward to the current so-called fiscal cliff negotiations. The deal on the table is smaller, and yet the president Wednesday said Republicans should be pleased with the spending cuts they'd be getting him to sign on to.
Take the deal. They will be able to claim that they have worked with me over the last 2 years to reduce the deficit more than any other deficit reduction package, that we will have stabilized it for 10 years. That is a significant achievement for them. They should be proud of it.
But clearly, they're not.
We are going to begin to solve our debt problem. And we're not going to be able to solve it by kicking the can down the road and doing all the gimmicks that have been done in the past. It's time to address our spending problem.
Will either party really ever do that? Here's the inside Washington reason why many are skeptical. Let's take a look at the full scope and size of the government over the past 5 years. Now, in yellow, you can see how the approximately $10 billion of your tax dollars spent by our government in a day adds up to upwards of $3 trillion a year. Now, above that, in the red, that's the interest we're paying on that spending, well into the hundreds of billions of dollars. So when it comes time for Washington to make cuts, we lose some of that yellow, right? Well, actually, no. You see this gray line right here? Those are the cuts. Lawmakers, when they're making cuts, have ended up slashing away an amount of money that doesn't even cover the interest when they've been so-called cutting. And we continue spending more each year. So what we're actually spending doesn't ever truly get cut. We never get into the yellow.
The word cut is what government statisticians and budget officials call it, but in fact it's just really a slowing the growth. And sometimes the growth is still quite high even after it's slowed down.
They assume that if this year we spend 5%, next year we're going to spend 8%, and the year after that we're going to spend 10%. And they say, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we cut a percentage point off each one of those rates of growth? Okay, hey, 4 and 6 and 9 or something like that, and presto, that's a cut. Well, that's not a cut. That's just lower growth. But that's the way the government counts things. You can't count things that way in the private sector, but that's the way the public sector does it.
Former Democratic Senator Evan Bayh.
I think there was some passage in Alice in Wonderland that must have dealt with this, because in Washington, less of an increase is considered a cut, even though that's more money. Even no family, no business, no philanthropy is operated this way. If you're getting, 2% more, even if inflation's 2.2%, you're still getting more. But that's not the way Washington works. That's one of the political realities of this town that make things so difficult.
So why not scrap the system altogether and start from scratch or from zero?
Well, from time to time, there have been suggestions made for sort of zero-based budgeting. You just go back and start over again and you say, okay, how much money do we have? How are we going to allocate it? And if we can do more, we do more. But you don't judge yourself by some artificial and fictitious, future escalation that may or may not be affordable. That's the way every business, every family, every charitable foundation has to operate. Would be good if the federal government did that too.
It's hard to do. The private sector doesn't assume that they're going to spend the same amount of money with the same suppliers and the same subcontractors every year. They look at it, they say, what should we spend our money on, and who's giving us the best deal? The way the government assumes is we're going to do everything we did last year plus a certain percentage. That's kind of how the way the government works. And the reason is because they're not responsible for raising the money the way the private sector does. They can actually go to taxpayers and say, pay up or go to jail. Of course, you can't do that in the private sector. But when the public sector doesn't have these constraints, it doesn't have an incentive to do this zero-based budgeting, to make the same kind of decisions that all of us make. And that's, frankly, Brett, the reason we're in the position that we're in today.
Tomorrow night, a look at the best way to measure debt, also the Federal Reserve, interest rates, and what could happen soon.